Hello everyone, today I'm going to show you some techniques for blending with acrylic paints. So these are quite simple basic techniques, nice and easy for beginners. So you can try any of the techniques that I show you, but you don't have to paint if you don't want to. You might decide to do your artwork by drawing it with pencils or oil pastels or pens. It's up to you. So we're going to create a few tonal scales, so you need to have a reasonably big brush and you need to pre-mix yourself some different tints and tones of whatever colours you choose. I'm starting with white, so I'm going to go light to dark. I'm using a paper towel to wipe my brush because I don't want to have it being covered in water. I want to keep my brush reasonably dry. And I'm going to start by just applying a few different tones. So each time I change colors, I am wiping my brush and I'm applying it as thick as I can so that it's going to stay wet and not dry out before I've gotten to blending it. So I might just blend those ones for now and then we can go darker later. So one of the techniques we can use is stippling. So that's where we're using a dabbing technique. So you can do it with a flat brush, or you might prefer to do it with a round brush. You can do it with a small brush or a big brush, it doesn't matter. So it's not using the tip of the brush, it's using the side, and we're not pressing too hard. We're not completely squidging the brush, just little gentle taps. And each time we lift our brush off the piece of paper or the canvas, we always wipe it. So we're using a dry brush whenever we try to blend. So we might just start by dabbing over that join there. And then we want to imagine that we are pulling one color towards the next. So if I want to move that pink color towards the white, I make sure that I put my brush down where I see the pink and then I'm moving towards the white. Same with the darker one. If I want to move that towards the pink, I start on the darker area and I move towards the lighter area. If I go too far, I start on the lighter area and I go back towards the dark area. So if I want to move the dark color, I put my brush down on the dark color. If I want to move the light color, I put my brush down on the light color. This will become second nature to you eventually, and you won't have to even think about what you're doing. But just while you're practicing, just be aware of where you are putting down your brush and make sure that you pay attention to your tonal scale. Make sure you're trying to keep it as gradual as possible. So if you were to do a bit over here and then you jump and you do over here, you're actually going to drag some paint over. See how that's too dark now? So that's why we need to wipe our brush, and that's why we need to think about where we're putting the brush. So now I'm picking up white and I'm dragging it back over. So understanding what you're actually doing when you make your marks or your brush strokes is very important to helping you to understand how to fix any problems. Because quite a lot of the time people will just work in one direction and they'll end up dragging their light color all the way along and they'll end up making it just look all very one colored. So what we want is a gradual transition between each tone. So if you wanted to go towards your darker tones, if you wanted a lot of contrast, you can start putting some blacks and browns into your paint. Whenever you've got really vibrant colors and maybe you want to create a bit of a look that is more earthy or more natural, so if you're painting leaves and you don't want them to look fluoro green, you always work with browns. You use browns to make your colors less vibrant. You can use black for your really dark areas, but you need to have brown in between so that you're taking a gradual step down. So black is quite a hard color to blend in. So I'm going to load my brush up with this color and then I'm going to start moving towards the black. And I'm being very careful to always put my brush down after I have wiped it on paper towel. And you can see every time my brush lifts off the paper, I'm wiping it. And I've got my paper towel bundled up. I just hold it in the middle, pinch and pull. And that way it's nice and quick and I'm not having to brush it on a piece of newspaper or anything, which isn't quite as good at getting that brush clean. So I've just put a bit of extra red paint on my brush because that red paint was drying out a little bit. And now I'm dabbing that area. So that's one technique. That's a stippling technique. And you'll be left with more of a fluffy, dabby look. So if you're going for something with a little bit more texture, you might decide to go for that. If you want it to look a lot more smooth, you can try using little circles to blend your paint. So let's just try that on this one. So I'm going to put some white down. And we won't do the whole tonal scale for every single one. We'll just look at the blending techniques now. And then I'm going to pick up a little bit of this pinky tone and put that here. And you can see when I put it down, I'm sort of overlapping it anyway. So then to get that to blend, what I'm going to do is take a small brush, a reasonably small one, and I'm going to fluff the bristles up. So I'm going to try and make it as fluffy as possible. If you've got a brush that's already nice and fluffy, that will work really well as well. So again, you need to have paper towel, and every time your brush comes off the canvas, it needs to be dried. So working in small little tiny circles, I am almost buffing the paint. The softer your brush, the easier this is going to work. These brushes that you will have with the blue handles are made to have more of a point. So you'll see that the bristles are shaped into a bit of a point. If you have a brush that's got more of a rounded tip, it's going to be a lot easier for you to create smooth blending. So when I move my brush on the canvas, if you actually look, if I hold this bit of paper up and you look at it from the side, that's how much my brush is touching the paper. Not this much. I can't even feel that it's touching the paper. So it's a very, very light amount of pressure. There's a little bug on the paper. Very, very light, and wiping it every single time I pick it up and move it. Same principle, if I've gone too far towards the white and I want to drag the white back over, I put my brush down on the white and I work towards the darker colour. If I need to go back the other way, put my brush down on the pink and I work towards the lighter colour. I might use bigger circles where I'm trying to get more of a gradual transition. So I might just want to spread my colour out a little bit more, and then I might use little tiny circles to polish it off and make it look really neat. While I'm working, I tend to put my eyes out of focus as if I'm staring at something, because in doing that I'm seeing what it would look like from a distance and I'm imagining how well am I actually blending it, so I can see whether or not there's a sudden stop and start in tone, and I can go back and try and make that more gradual. So the difficulty with acrylic paint is that it does dry a little bit faster, so that's why you need to make sure that you're applying your paint really, really thick, and you can always go back and add more where you need to. If you're adding more and you're trying to get it to blend into something that's already dry, you can use a little bit of water to thin your paint out, and that will help with that. So that's using little tiny circles to do your blending. Another technique that people like to use is a bit of a zigzaggy technique. Where the two colours meet, we zigzag. So we zigzag side to side, and then we zigzag up and down. And we go in both directions when we do up and down. So this is really good if you're trying to blend something over a very long distance, or something really small even. But it's not so good if you're trying to do something that's quite rounded, like a circle. This technique with the little tiny circles works better if you're trying to create a curve in whatever you're blending. This is better, this Zig Zaggy technique, if you're trying to create like just a straight line of gradient. So it's not curving or bending, it's just going straight across. So zigzagging one way, zigzagging the other way. And if you look at how far my bristles are bending when they touch the paper, they're not doing this, it's a gentle touch. So I can't feel the brush actually touching my page. And same thing again, if I want to drag this color over, I pull it towards the light. If I want to drag the light over, I pull it towards the dark. So to make that a little bit more obvious, if I put some white here, if I put my brush down on my white and I drag towards my darker color, it's going to start to come over the top. So it's drying up a bit. If I want to bring that dark color back, I just push it back the other way. I'm starting to apply a little bit more pressure when my paint is starting to dry up, so you might do that as well. If you start to notice that, you probably want to add a little bit of water or just more paint. So another technique, if you feel like those aren't working for you still, is to make your paint a little bit more watered down. So I'm going to add a lot of water to my paint now and make it really, really runny. And it will almost feel like watercolor paint. So you can see it's a little bit more transparent. You have to probably work a bit quicker still if you're doing this technique, because of course it's going to dry up quicker. But if you're trying to create like a wash or a very subtle background, people like to use this technique if they're doing clouds or something. So then I just need to take my water, because my paint is so thin, and I'm adding water to that. So I'm not using any paint, it's already sort of sunk into the canvas. I'm just using water, clear, plain water, to smudge that. Bit more water. So this is more of a loose watercolor technique, so you're not going to get as much realism with this technique, but if you like to work with your paint a lot thinner, you can water it down, that's fine. And the good thing is sometimes you want whatever's in your background to show through your paint a little bit, so you can just add water if you're trying to achieve that. So something other people do as well is they'll take a bigger brush and they'll actually just gently go over things to smooth it down, keeping their brush really dry. I personally don't like this technique. I find that there's not enough control in what I'm doing. But some people really love this technique. So you can see it starts to blur it a little bit. So just going in both directions, one way and then the other way. If you were to use like a little tiny circles enough, you would buff out the brush strokes enough that it could be perfectly smooth. But if you're doing a large area, you might decide to do this technique. But it is important that your paint is evenly dry, so that it's not got one bit that's sort of taking over the other bit. You can see this was a little bit drier than here, so this is taking over. So just going over it just smooths it out a little bit, and you've got less brush strokes than what you would have in other areas. So you've got your stippling, that's where you're doing little dabs, little tiny circles, zigzags or flat dry brushing, and watered down paint. So you choose whichever technique you want to have a play with, and you can do a tonal scale like this where it goes from dark to light, or you might do a circle similar to how the technique was demonstrated for the pencil demonstration. So you would do the same thing, you would have a light spot and then a medium spot, and then a darker spot, and then a really dark spot. So same positioning of your colors as with your pencils, but you're using one of these techniques to try and blend it if you decide to do a shape instead of a tonal scale. Thank you very much. Good luck.